This is my true story. I gave my whole life to my only son. I worked through pain, hunger, and old age just so he would never know struggle. I thought I had built a bond that time could never break. But one evening he looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not my family." Those words killed something inside me. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just wrote one letter, placed it on the table, and walked out of the life I built. Before I tell you what I wrote, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened so suddenly that even the air in the room felt heavier. We were having dinner, nothing special, just soup, bread, and the kind of silence that families share when love has faded but routine remains. I asked him how work was, and he didn't even look up. He just said it, calm and cold, like he had practiced it 100 times. "You're not my family." The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. The sound was small, but it felt like thunder inside my chest. I sat there staring at him, hoping he would laugh, say it was a joke, anything. But his face didn't change. It was blank, cruel in its calmness. He pushed his chair back, left the table, and went to his room. I sat there with half a plate of soup and a whole world that suddenly meant nothing. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right. My own son, the boy who used to hold my hand when crossing the road, the boy who cried when I worked late, had just erased me with one sentence. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words. "You're not my family." What does that even mean? Family is not something you can decide to cancel. It's in the blood, in the sacrifices, in the years you give without asking for anything back. I built that roof over his head with my own hands. I gave up dreams, opportunities, comfort, all so he could have his. And now, in one breath, he threw all of that away. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants. But the silence between us was heavy, different this time. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even look at me. He just grabbed his bag and left. As the door closed, I realized something. I was no longer a father in that house. I was a stranger living among the memories of a man who used to matter. I thought about all the years I tried to teach him respect, not just for me, but for people in general. I thought about how I told him once, "The way you treat those who love you says everything about the kind of man you are." I guess he forgot that lesson. Or maybe I failed to teach it. Maybe I was too soft, too forgiving, too proud of him to see who he was becoming. The pain didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like waves. One moment I'd feel numb, the next I'd feel rage burning inside me. But mostly, I felt emptiness. It's strange how words can hurt more than a knife. A wound on your body heals, but a wound on your heart keeps bleeding in silence. I walked around the house, and everything reminded me of him. The pictures on the wall, the old toys I never threw away, the handwriting on the refrigerator notes. I sat in his old room and wondered when love turned into resentment. That evening, I decided not to speak to him again. Not because of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. I had spent my whole life giving, love, money, patience, and now I wanted to give myself one thing, peace. But I knew I couldn't just disappear without leaving a mark. Not a revenge, not punishment, just a message he would never forget, a truth he couldn't erase. So I took a piece of paper and began to write. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. I wrote the first line slowly. "You said, 'I'm not your family.'" I paused there, stared at those words, and felt them cut through me again. Then I continued, "So I'm giving you what you wanted." I folded the letter halfway, then stopped. No, it wasn't enough. I needed him to understand the weight of what he said, not through my pain, but through his own emptiness. I picked up a pen again and added one more line, one that would change everything for both of us. When I sealed the letter, I felt calm. For the first time in years, my heart was still. I looked around the house one last time, the walls that had heard my laughter and my tears, and I realized it was time to let go. The man I raised had killed the father in me. Now it was my turn to bury what remained. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own thoughts, your own heartbeat, your own regrets. He didn't say a word when he woke up, just walked past me, grabbed his coffee, and left without looking in my direction. I sat at the table long after the door closed, staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair used to hold laughter. That chair used to hold love. Now it held nothing. The silence wasn't new. It had been building for years, small moments that stacked on top of each other until they became walls. The skipped breakfasts, the phone calls he never answered, the birthdays he forgot. I told myself he was busy, that life was just pulling him in another direction. But I see it now. He wasn't too busy. He was just done with me. I was an old chapter in a book he didn't want to read anymore. Every corner of that house whispered memories. The clock on the wall that he helped me fix when he was 12. The couch where we watched old football games. The photo frames filled with moments I thought were real. I sat there thinking, when did I stop being his father and become just a name on his ID? I gave him everything. I didn't hold back love, didn't hold back money, didn't hold back time. Yet somewhere along the way, he learned how to erase me while still smiling to my face. The silence that day wasn't peaceful. It was punishment. I tried turning on the TV, but the sound felt wrong. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like dust. Even the dogs, the only ones left who showed affection, stayed quiet, as if they too could feel something heavy in the air. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My heart was too tired. Pain like that doesn't come with tears. It comes with stillness. It comes with realization. That night, I sat on my bed and listened to the world outside. Cars passed by. Somewhere people laughed. But inside these walls, it was like time stopped. I looked at the ceiling and thought about every mistake I made raising him. Maybe I was too forgiving. Maybe I was too proud of him. Maybe I failed to teach him what loyalty means. Or maybe some people are born with hearts that can't hold gratitude. Either way, the silence had turned into an answer. He didn't have to say anything else. He had already said everything. I walked to his old room. The bed was messy, the desk full of things he never cleaned. On the wall was a photo, me holding him on his first day of school. He was smiling so big, so bright. He looked like a boy who trusted his father completely. I touched that picture and realized that boy was gone. The man who replaced him had no room left in his heart for love, only pride. And pride, I've learned, eats everything around it. As the night grew darker, I sat outside again. The moonlight hit the porch, the same spot where I once told him bedtime stories, where he once said, "You're my hero, Dad." How fast things change. The silence between us had turned from a pause to a permanent ending. I knew he would never apologize. He didn't think he did anything wrong. He thought he was finally free. Free from an old man who had given him too much. But that silence gave me clarity. Sometimes the cruelest words don't come from hate. They come from indifference. My son didn't hate me, he just stopped caring. And that, I think, hurts more. Because you can fight hate, but you can't fight emptiness. I realized then that the best thing I could do was vanish quietly. No shouting, no explanation, just silence. The same silence he had taught me to live with. So I decided, before morning came, that I would give him what he wanted. Freedom. I would disappear, not as punishment, but as release. For him and for myself. The silence between us would become permanent, but at least it would be peaceful. I went back inside, looked at the letter I wrote, and placed it carefully where he would find it. Then I sat down one last time, surrounded by everything I built, everything I loved, and whispered to the empty house, "You'll understand one day." That night, the house felt colder than it ever had before. Not because of the weather, but because of the emptiness that had settled inside it. Every sound echoed, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the wind pushing against the windows. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a family that no longer existed. The pictures on the walls looked back at me, frozen in time, showing smiles that no longer belonged to us. I picked up one photo, him standing with his mother, both smiling wide. Back then, everything seemed perfect. I would have given my life for those smiles. I guess in a way I did. As I sat there, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was beyond that. Anger is for people who still care. I just felt finished. Finished trying. Finished explaining. Finished waiting for him to see the man who gave up everything to make him who he was. I thought about every moment I had been proud of him. When he graduated, when he got his first job, when he bought his first car. I was there for all of it. But where was he now, when all I needed was kindness? The truth hit me hard. He didn't hate me. He just didn't need me anymore. That's the cruelest part of growing old. You don't lose your children to death or distance. You lose them to indifference. They stop calling. They stop caring. And one day, they stop remembering that you're still alive. You become a shadow in your own home. I used to think time would fix things, but time doesn't heal neglect. It only makes it easier for them to forget. I went to his room again that night. It still smelled faintly of his cologne. His clothes were scattered on the chair, his shoes lined up neatly. It looked like he lived there, but his heart had moved somewhere else. I sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could turn into something so cold. I thought maybe he was angry at me for something I didn't know I'd done. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe he blamed me for things I couldn't change. But then I realized no reason could justify what he said. "You're not my family." That sentence was a death sentence to everything we once were. Around midnight, I stood up and walked outside. The sky was clear and the stars were bright. I remembered how, when he was a little boy, we used to sit in the backyard and name the stars. He would say, "That one's mine," and I'd laugh and say, "Then that one's mine." Now, standing there alone, I realized how far apart we had drifted. He had his stars, bright, distant, unreachable, and I had none left. I went back inside and sat at my desk. The letter I had written earlier lay folded beside a small stack of papers, bank documents, house deeds, a few photographs. I placed them all in one envelope. My hands shook as I wrote his name on the front. I looked around one last time. The chair by the window, the old clock, the framed photo of his graduation. Everything that once had meaning now just felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty room. "You win, son. You have your freedom, and I'll have mine." I didn't pack much, just a small bag, some clothes, and an old watch my wife gave me before she passed. That watch was the only thing that still made me feel human. I walked through the house one last time, touching the walls, the doorknobs, the memories. I stopped by his door. I wanted to open it, just once more, but I didn't. I knew if I did, I might not have the strength to leave. So, I placed the letter on the kitchen table, right where he would see it in the morning. The same table where we used to eat together, where he once told me about his dreams, where he now told me I didn't belong. I turned off the lights, opened the door, and stepped outside. The air was cold, but it felt cleaner than anything inside that house. I didn't look back. Some goodbyes don't need words, only silence. The road outside my house was quiet as I walked away, each step echoing like a memory I couldn't silence. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The letter was on the table, and that was enough. It carried everything I needed to say. As I reached the corner, I turned once to look back. The lights from the house were still on. For a moment, I wondered if he'd ever notice that I was gone. Probably not. Not right away. Maybe not ever. I walked for hours, through streets that used to feel familiar but now seemed foreign. Every house I passed had warm light, laughter, and the hum of family life. I used to have that once. I thought love and effort were enough to hold a family together. I believed that if you gave your whole heart, people would protect it. But I learned something cruel that night. Love is not always returned, and sometimes it dies quietly without even saying goodbye. As I sat on a bench by the bus stop, I thought about everything I had done for him. The sleepless nights when he was sick, the extra shifts I worked to buy him his first computer, the times I pretended I wasn't hungry so he could have a bigger share of dinner. I gave up parts of myself so he could have a better life. That's what parents do. They give until there's nothing left. And still, it wasn't enough. Maybe I raised him wrong. Maybe I gave him too much, made things too easy. Maybe he grew up thinking love came with no effort. I realized that by protecting him from pain, I had made him blind to empathy. He learned comfort, but not compassion. He learned how to take, but never how to give. That realization was the hardest part, knowing that I might have built the very man who broke me. The reflection hurt more than the words ever could. It wasn't just about him saying I wasn't family. It was about everything that led to that moment. Every small instance of disrespect I ignored. Every sign of selfishness I brushed aside because I thought love could fix it. Love can forgive a lot, but it can't survive in a house where it's not respected. I had been blind for too long, pretending not to see the way he spoke to me, the way he treated my sacrifices as obligations instead of gifts. When the bus arrived, I didn't have a plan. I just got on. The driver asked where I was going and I said, "Anywhere." He nodded like he'd heard that before. I sat by the window, watching the city fade behind me. Each mile felt like shedding a layer of pain. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't waiting for approval, or gratitude, or even love. I was just existing, quietly, honestly, alone. As the bus moved through the night, I remembered the good moments too. The time he hugged me after his graduation, the way he used to fall asleep on my shoulder when he was small. I didn't want to erase those memories. They were real once, even if they meant nothing now. That's the cruelest truth about love. It doesn't vanish when people hurt you. It stays. It lingers like a scar you can't remove. I thought about turning back, just once, to give him another chance. But then I remembered his face, cold and unbothered, when he told me I wasn't his family. No tears, no hesitation, just truth, sharp and heartless. That image burned in my mind. No, there was no turning back. I had finally reached the point where I didn't want him to apologize. I just wanted to forget. The night ended with me stepping off the bus in a small town by the coast. I rented a small room near the water, a place with peeling paint and old wooden floors. It didn't matter. It was peaceful. I sat by the window and listened to the waves crash in the distance. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for footsteps, phone calls, or voices that would never come. I just sat there, breathing, free. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe I'd send another letter someday. Maybe not. But as I closed my eyes that night, I realized something. Love doesn't die when someone rejects you. It just changes shape. I still loved my son, but now it was the kind of love you carry from far away, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore because it expects nothing. Morning came slowly, with sunlight creeping through the thin curtains of the small room. The sea breeze smelled of salt and peace. For the first time in years, I woke up without the sound of disappointment in my ears. No footsteps pacing around the house, no phone vibrating with arguments, just silence and freedom. I sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the shore, and I knew I had done the right thing. Leaving wasn't running away, it was surviving. I spent the early hours thinking about everything I had built, and everything I had lost. The house, the car, the business. They didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the weight I had carried for too long, the guilt, the heartbreak, the endless cycle of giving and being rejected. I realized that I had been living for someone who didn't want me in his world. And that's not living at all. That's waiting to die slowly. I decided that from that day on, I wouldn't wait for love or forgiveness. I would live for peace. I walked outside and sat on the beach, my feet buried in the sand. The sky was clear, the ocean calm, like the world had been waiting for me to finally notice its quiet beauty. I thought about my son again, how life must look from his side now. A big house, a good job, comfort, and control. He had everything I once dreamed of giving him, yet none of it filled the emptiness between us. That's what cruelty does. It doesn't just break hearts, it drains souls. I wondered if he even noticed my absence, or if he was too busy pretending I never existed. Still, a part of me hoped he'd find that letter and understand it was never about revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. I just wanted him to realize the cost of indifference. People think cruelty is loud, shouting, hitting, screaming. But real cruelty is quiet. It's the look away when someone needs you. It's the word left unsaid when someone is begging to be seen. That's what my son gave me. Silence that cut deeper than any insult. So I made my decision final. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't call. I wouldn't send another letter. I would let him live with the emptiness he created. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of love is to remove it completely. And I wasn't going to break my own heart trying to rebuild something he had already burned to ashes. I visited the nearest post office and bought a small notebook. That day, I started writing again. Not letters for him, but words for myself. Small reminders of who I was before the pain. "You are enough," I wrote on the first page. "You were always enough." The pen felt heavy at first, but the more I wrote, the lighter my chest felt. Maybe forgiveness wasn't for him anymore. Maybe it was for me. Later, I walked through the town market, bought some bread, and fed the stray dogs that lingered nearby. They wagged their tails, grateful for even a crumb. Their eyes were full of trust, something I hadn't seen in years. I smiled, realizing they reminded me of myself, forgotten, but still capable of love. That night, I went to bed with a strange peace. I didn't have much, but I had my dignity back. My decision wasn't easy. Every father wants to believe his child will come back, apologize, and make things right. But waiting for that can destroy a man. I chose to walk away instead of waiting to be erased piece by piece. I didn't want pity. I wanted quiet. I wanted to remember how it felt to live without walking on broken glass. As I drifted to sleep, I thought about something my own father once told me. A man who loses respect loses nothing if he keeps his peace. That night, I finally understood what he meant. I lost my son, but I found myself again. The letter sat on the table all night before I left. I had written and rewritten it a dozen times, trying to find the right words. But how do you say goodbye to your own child, not because you want to, but because you have to? I stared at the page until my eyes blurred. My hands trembled as I folded it one last time, sealing it inside the envelope with everything that needed to be said. It wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It was simply truth. I started the letter by reminding him of the day he was born, how small he was, how terrified I was to hold him, how I promised his mother that I would never let him feel pain. I told him how I spent my entire life keeping that promise, even when it meant breaking myself to protect him. I reminded him that every scar on my hand was from working double shifts so he could have what I never had, that every wrinkle on my face was carved by worry for his future. But I also told him something I had never said before, that love isn't blind. It sees everything and forgives anyway. Until one day, it can't anymore. Then I told him what I'd done, that I had left him everything he said he wanted. Freedom from me. That the house, the money, the business, they were all his, in name. But the truth was, inside the folded documents. He would soon realize that I had already transferred it all to charity. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want the weight of my name to burden him. I wanted him to live exactly as he wished, without the man he denied. The next part was harder to write. I told him that being a father had been my greatest joy and my deepest wound, that watching him grow into a stranger had been like dying slowly, one conversation at a time. I admitted that I had stayed too long, hoping one day he'd look at me and see not the old man he pitied, but the father who gave him life. But that hope had died the night he said I wasn't his family. Some words can't be taken back. They echo forever. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't want him to chase me or pretend to care. I told him I was done being the ghost that haunted his comfort. The only thing I wanted him to understand was that love without respect isn't love at all. It's pity dressed as kindness, and I wanted no part of it anymore. I ended the letter by writing, "You don't owe me anything, son. But one day, when you sit in an empty house and wonder why it feels so quiet, I hope you remember. Silence is the sound of all the things you took for granted." When I finished, I sat there staring at the envelope for a long time. My heart felt hollow, but my mind was clear. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table beside his favorite coffee mug, the one I'd bought him years ago when he got his first job. It felt symbolic. A full circle of love given, love lost. I knew the letter would hurt him. Maybe it was supposed to. Sometimes pain is the only teacher left. I hoped he would read it more than once. The first time in confusion, the second time in denial, and the third time, maybe, in understanding. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to see what he had destroyed in me. Before I walked out that door, I whispered one last thing to the empty room. "Goodbye, my boy. I hope you find the man I tried to be." Then I locked the door, dropped the key through the mail slot, and left without turning back. I didn't take anything, not even a photograph. Because when someone tells you that you're not their family, you learn to travel light. That letter wasn't meant for revenge. It was meant for truth. A truth he couldn't avoid, even if he tore the paper apart. I knew someday it would find him. Maybe when he was older, maybe when he finally became a father. That's when the words would return to him, not as punishment, but as reflection. The day he'd finally understand that losing a father doesn't always mean death. Sometimes it means losing the only person who ever stayed, even when everyone else left. The letter I left behind was simple, but it carried the weight of my entire life. I knew he would open it expecting an apology or a list of reasons to pity me. He always thought I was weak, an old man who would never fight back. But the truth was, I didn't need to fight. I only needed to show him what silence feels like when love finally runs out. When I walked out of that house, I didn't just leave behind my son. I left behind years of humiliation I had convinced myself was patience. I left behind every cruel word he had thrown at me, every look that told me I was nothing more than a burden. I had been blind for too long, calling abuse family, calling disrespect a phase. That night, I stopped making excuses for someone who never cared to make one for me. He would find the letter and the documents the next morning. He would probably laugh at first, thinking he'd inherited everything. He'd see my signature, my handwriting, my quiet surrender, and he'd feel powerful. But that feeling wouldn't last long, because the next page would tell him what I had truly done. That was the twist I left for him. The truth that would break through his arrogance like a storm through glass. The house he lived in, the land he thought was his future, the savings he believed he'd one day control, all of it had been transferred to charity in both our names. I made sure of it legally, signed and witnessed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reflection. I wanted him to see that everything he took for granted could disappear in a single night, the same way he erased me with a single sentence. The money went to an orphanage in the city, the same one I used to volunteer at when he was young. The staff there had always treated me with more warmth than my own son. They fed me when I had nothing, listened when I was lonely, and treated me like a human being. I thought of those children, abandoned, forgotten, unloved, and I realized they deserved what my son had wasted. Maybe my money could give them what I failed to give him: gratitude. I also left a small note for the lawyer, a single line to be read if my son ever contested the transfer. It said, "He taught me how it feels to be unwanted." I just gave him the same lesson. I didn't know if the lawyer would ever need to read it aloud, but the thought of it gave me peace. For once, the silence I left behind had meaning. Some might call it cruel, but cruelty is when love dies while you're still alive to feel it. I had lived through that for years. This was mercy, for both of us. He wanted freedom from me, and I gave it to him completely. But I also wanted him to understand that freedom without love feels like emptiness. He'd have the walls, the furniture, the memories, but none of it would matter, because none of it would carry warmth anymore. When the news reached me that he had gone back to the house and found strangers living there, I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat quietly in my chair, looking at the ocean. I imagined the look on his face when he realized what I'd done. Confusion, disbelief, maybe even anger. But beneath it all, there would be guilt. And that guilt would follow him longer than any punishment I could give. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to understand, to feel, for just one moment, what it's like to be invisible, to scream love into an empty room and hear nothing in return. That's the lesson I left him. Not out of hate, but out of a final act of truth. Some sons need their fathers to die before they understand their worth. Mine just needed me to disappear. As I looked out over the waves that night, I whispered, "Now you're truly free, my son." The sea carried my words away. Maybe someday, if the wind is right, they'll find him. But by then, I'll be too far gone to care. The morning I left, the sky was gray, the kind of dull, heavy gray that makes the world feel quiet. I packed nothing but a small bag, a few clothes, my old watch, and a photo of him when he was little. I didn't take the documents or the money. Everything was already taken care of. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the empty living room. It was once filled with warmth, laughter, and noise. Now it felt like a stranger's house. The walls didn't speak anymore. They just listened. I walked out slowly, locking the door behind me. It wasn't a grand escape. There was no drama, no final goodbye. Just silence. That's how endings really happen. Not with shouting, but with stillness. I left the key under the mat where he'd find it later, along with the letter on the table. My feet felt heavy, but my chest felt light. I was done waiting for love that never came. At the train station, I bought the first ticket I could afford. No destination in mind, just away. The woman at the counter looked at me and asked if it was a one-way trip. I nodded. I didn't plan on coming back. I sat by the window as the train moved, watching the city shrink into dust and memory. Every mile felt like a layer of pain peeling off. Every sound of the wheels against the track reminded me that I was still alive, free, for the first time in years. For days I traveled aimlessly, staying in small inns and eating what little I could afford. Nobody knew my name, and I liked it that way. When people asked who I was, I said, "Just an old man passing through." I didn't want pity. I wanted peace. I wanted to see what it felt like to exist without being needed or hated. The world outside my old life was bigger than I remembered. There were faces that smiled without reason, voices that spoke without cruelty. It was strange and comforting at the same time. I ended up near the sea, a quiet town where nobody asked questions. I rented a small room above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread woke me every morning. The woman who ran the place didn't care about my past. She only asked if I liked coffee. I spent my days sitting by the shore, watching the water rise and fall, thinking about how life moves just like the tide, pulling some things away, bringing others back. But some things, once lost, never return. Back home, I knew my son would be looking for me, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of confusion. He'd check my old haunts, call the neighbors, maybe even report me missing. But I wasn't missing. I was just gone in the way that truly matters. You can't find someone who's finally found peace. I imagined his face when he realized the truth. That I hadn't just disappeared. I had chosen to disappear. That I had stopped being his father the moment he stopped being my son. At night, I sometimes wondered if he'd changed. If the silence of the house made him think. Maybe he'd sit where I used to sit, stare at the table where the letter once lay, and feel the same emptiness I did. Maybe he'd whisper my name, hoping for an answer. But I was done answering to pain. I had given enough of myself to someone who never asked how I was, only what I had to give. I didn't disappear out of hatred. I disappeared to save what was left of me. People think vanishing is cowardice, but sometimes it's the only way to keep your soul from dying. I learned that the hard way, that love without respect is poison, and silence can be the only cure. The world moved on, and so did I. Now no one knows where I am. That's how I wanted it. Some say I went abroad. Some say I live near the mountains. Let them guess. The truth is simpler. I live somewhere quiet, where the sea can't judge and the past can't follow. I left everything behind, the pain, the pride, the blood that turned cold. I disappeared, yes. But in doing so, I finally became visible, at least to myself. Days passed after I disappeared, and though I had no contact with him, I knew exactly what he would feel. I had lived with him long enough to understand his pride, his silence, his habit of blaming everyone but himself. But pride cracks in loneliness. Silence grows heavier when no one is there to break it. I imagined him walking through the empty house, the same house where his laughter once drowned out my pain. I imagined him calling my name out of habit, only to remember that I was gone. That realization would hit harder than any punishment I could ever give. At first, he must have felt confusion. He probably thought I had gone to visit someone or that I'd be back after cooling off. He might have even laughed at the idea of me leaving, the weak old man finally running away. But when the days turned into weeks and the phone stayed silent, the laughter would have stopped. That's when fear would begin to whisper in his head. The kind of fear that asks questions he doesn't want to answer. What if he never comes back? What if I really lost him? What if my words were the last ones he ever heard? I can picture it clearly. Him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope again, reading the letter over and over, hoping there was something he missed. Maybe a clue, maybe a hint that I'd forgive him if he just called. But there wasn't. The paper would still say the same thing, the handwriting still firm, the message still final. That's when he would start to understand that my disappearance wasn't an act of anger. It was a consequence of years of neglect. Then the shame would follow. Shame doesn't come all at once. It arrives in moments. Maybe he'd see my empty chair and remember how I used to sit there waiting for him to talk. Maybe he'd walk past my room and realize he never once asked me if I slept well. Maybe he'd find one of the old photographs, him on my shoulders as a child, and realize the man he had thrown away was the same man who carried him through every storm. That's when guilt becomes unbearable. I didn't want him to suffer forever. I just wanted him to feel what I had felt, that hollow silence where love should be. Because sometimes a person doesn't value what they have until they feel the emptiness it leaves behind. I hoped he'd learn that lesson. I hoped the echo of his own cruelty would finally reach him. He once told me I wasn't his family. Now he would understand what those words really meant. To have no family isn't peace. It's a cold, endless kind of quiet. Some neighbors told me later that he stopped showing up to his job, that he spent days sitting in the garden, staring at the gate like he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was waiting for me. Maybe he finally realized that family isn't just blood. It's time, sacrifice, forgiveness. And those things can't be replaced once they're gone. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. Because now he had everything he ever wanted. The house, the space, the freedom. But none of it mattered. Because love can't be rebuilt once it's buried. He probably thought of calling the lawyer too, to undo what I'd done. But he'd learn soon enough that it was permanent, legal, untouchable. Just like the damage he'd done to my heart. That's the cruelest kind of justice. When the punishment isn't something done to you, but something you created yourself. My absence was his own doing. My silence was his own echo. And as for me, I found peace in my quiet life by the sea. I didn't think of revenge anymore. I just thought of how strange it is that a man can give his entire life to raising someone, only for that person to realize too late what it meant. He lost a father, but I didn't lose a son. I had already lost him long ago, the moment he stopped calling me Dad. Now, whenever I close my eyes, I whisper to myself. Some lessons are written in ink, but the hardest ones are written in absence. And I know somewhere, in that big empty house, my son is finally reading both. It's been years now since I vanished from that house, and yet, sometimes, I still wake up before dawn, expecting to hear the creak of the old floorboards or the sound of someone calling me for breakfast. Then I remember where I am, a small room by the sea with nothing but the waves for company. The mornings are quiet here. I make my coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the horizon. There's peace in the stillness, but peace has a strange sound when you've earned it through heartbreak. It hums softly, like a wound that's learned how to breathe. I never told anyone my real name. The people in town just call me the old man by the shore. They don't know about my son or my past. They don't ask, and I don't explain. Sometimes, when children play near the beach, they wave at me, and I wave back. There's warmth in their innocence, something my son once had before the world taught him pride. I don't blame him anymore. I've stopped blaming anyone. Some things aren't worth carrying forever. I heard from a distant relative months ago. News travels even when you try to hide from it. My son lost the house. The upkeep was too much. The taxes piled up. He tried to sell it, but no one wanted it. It was old, heavy with history, and empty of love. He moved to the city, started over, but they said he doesn't smile much anymore. Maybe he finally understood that wealth without a heart is just another kind of poverty. I don't celebrate his suffering. I only hope it taught him what I couldn't. Sometimes I think about sending another letter, not to scold, not to punish, but just to say I'm still alive. But every time I try, my hand freezes. What would I even write? That I forgive him? That I still think of him when the tide rises? Maybe forgiveness doesn't need to be written. Maybe it's enough to simply not hate anymore. The sea has taught me that. Waves come and go, but they never stay angry. They just keep moving. The photo I took with me, the one of him as a child, sits on the shelf beside my bed. His smile in that picture is pure, unspoiled, untouched by arrogance or pain. That's the version of him I keep in my heart. The boy who held my hand when crossing the street, who hugged me without reason, who once whispered, "You're the best dad." That boy is gone, but the memory remains. And sometimes that's enough to make me smile again. I've built a quiet routine now. I help the fishermen mend their nets, I feed the stray dogs that wander near my door, and I share stories with the children who ask too many questions. They remind me that kindness still exists, that even if your own blood turns cold, there are still hearts in this world that know warmth. In their laughter, I find small pieces of the life I lost. At night, when the sea is dark and the wind howls against my window, I sometimes speak to the air. I say his name, just once, not out of longing, but out of memory. I tell the sea, "He's still my son," and then I let the waves carry that truth away. Because even after everything, the cruelty, the betrayal, the loneliness, I can't erase the part of me that loved him. A father's heart doesn't break clean. It cracks, heals, and cracks again, but it never stops beating for the child it once held. If he ever finds me one day, I don't know what I'll say. Maybe I won't say anything. Maybe I'll just look at him and smile, the same way I did when he was small. Because words have already done enough damage between us. Silence might be kinder. Until then, I'll keep living quietly, not waiting, not hoping, just being. I've learned that disappearing isn't about running away. It's about finally choosing peace over pain. And if he ever learns that too, maybe then, both of us will be free, not as father and son, but as two people who finally understood what love should have been.